we could talk all night about how polyphase works and all that good stuff, but we got lots of time to cover this stuff in some of the next meetings. Anyway, hopefully my mouse works here. Prodigal genius. Oh, come on. All right, Tesla was born in what is a little tiny town in what is now Croatia. This is the ocean right here, and this is all Yugoslavia. His father was a priest. That's the house he was born in, and this right here is just a little church that his father held his services in. There's his father, Milutin, and his mother, Duka. He had two sisters. He had a brother who died, and I think that had a big effect on his life, but he made through it. Now, his mother was extremely intelligent. She was uneducated, unschooled, but she was extremely intelligent. So genetically, he always gives her credit for his brains. The father wanted him to go into the priesthood, but he realized in an early age that was not going to happen. Whoops, wrong thing. There we go. Woo. Okay, young Tesla started primary school. He had a bout of cholera, almost killed him. And this is an interesting story. In 1882, this is when he discovered, came up with the concept of the rotating magnetic field. And he's a poet, just like us. He was actually walking down the road reciting Faust to his friend, and suddenly he had this revelation about how a polyphase system worked, and that was probably a download, so that's probably his first big download that he got from the masses. But it's nice to think that, like us, he's also a poet. He went to Paris. We went to school, obviously, but we can't talk about his education. And he got a job working for Edison in Paris. He made quite an impression on the people there, and he was introduced. He got a letter of recommendation. He decided to go to America and go meet Edison and get a job with this recommendation. Okay, now we want to talk about how Tesla's brain worked and why he was so able to come up with all these miraculous things in his head. But basically what had happened was he has the ability to visualize three-dimensional images in his head very, very clearly, very, very bright, and in very, very fine detail. So essentially he could assemble things, he could design, assemble, run, test for wear, weakness, efficiency, and build a prototype in his head before he ever built the prototype. So he could assemble a motor in his head, run that thing in his head, take it apart after 100,000 cycles, and check each piece for wear and tear, redesign it, put it back together, repeat the process until that motor was 100% perfect. So before the thing ever went to the manufacturing, he had already run thousands of tests in his head. And to do that today, we have to use some pretty sophisticated computers. Okay, alternating current, again, we're not going to get too much into this, but what he did was he realized that by creating magnetic fields, and there's actually three coils here, so there's three magnetic fields. And what happens is one will create a field, it turns off, the other one goes on, it turns off, the other one goes on. And what happens is as these fields are going around in a circle, it's causing the armature in the center to spin around, and that's essentially where the motion comes from, thus converting electricity into mechanical energy. The big thing about alternating current versus DC, which was the big thing at the time, is that alternating current has the ability to travel great distances without losing its efficiency. So if you start out with 120 volts, 200 miles down the way, you still have 120 volts. With a DC system, you'd have 120 volts, and about 20 miles away from the power plant, it would be down to 50 volts or something like that. So it was so according, if Edison had his way, we'd have big, ugly power plants every 20 miles, and cities would not have gotten very big, and we wouldn't have anything close to what we have today. Not to mention the efficiency of the AC motor. So he went to America, and he hooked up to Thomas Edison, and Thomas Edison was quite a character, also a genius, just like Tesla. But Thomas Edison was a self-made man, a self-taught man. He believed that invention was 5% inspiration, 95% perspiration. Whereas Edison, of course, Tesla, did complex mathematical calculations before he did anything. Anyway, Edison saw the AC system as a potential competitor, but he still hired him because he felt that there was something about this guy that he wanted to tap into. The first thing he did was he gave Tesla a job. He said, "I'll tell you what, I'll give you $50,000 if you can take my DC motor and improve it and get all the bugs out of it and increase its efficiency." And Edison, of course, thought this was an impossible job, and Tesla said, "Sure." So he went and did it. He comes back and says, "Here you go." And Edison said, wow, I really wasn't expecting you to do it. And he said, huh, you're not really expecting me to give you the money. That's our American humor. So anyway, needless to say, Tesla and Edison parted company right after that. This is a big giant generator, a DC generator. Obviously, Edison is very famous for his gramophone and your Edison light bulb. Well, if you look at this right here, it says 2 Tesla. So the guy had a real good sense of humor. He opened up a shop in New York on 40th Street, and he began to start making arc lamps and light bulbs. Here's the first photograph ever made with a arc lamp. And so this was the first photograph, and that's a pretty historic thing. That's Tesla's hand. Here's a picture of him holding one of his lamps, of course, with wireless energy. And we're going to do that real quick. Oh, I forgot to do that. Gosh, we'll have to do that later. He basically had some problems. There was a depression at the time, and he lost everything. He ended up being a street sweeper in New York, a sewer worker. But after a while, he had a bunch of patents in the works, and when some of those patents came through, he had something to work with, and he went to Western Telegraph, and they gave him some money and hooked him up, and he got a new shop. He also did a famous lecture before the Institute of Electrical Engineers at Columbia College in New York, and one of the people in the audience was none other than George Westinghouse. George Westinghouse, oh my gosh, I got to have this guy working for me. So he buys Tesla's patent for $1 million and tells him he's going to pay him $1 per horsepower on every AC item sold. Now just imagine how many horsepower of AC motors there are in the world today. And think of that in $1 per horsepower. Okay, so he goes to work for George Westinghouse, and thus begins the war of the currents between AC and DC. One thing we ought to say about George Westinghouse, because we talk a lot about these industrialists of the era and how so many of them were total jerks and just greedy bastards. Westinghouse is probably one of the greatest Americans of all time, okay, because he was a good man. He was not out to screw people, and he really served this country well. And together, Tesla and Westinghouse made a fantastic team, and those two are responsible for giving the world AC power. And together, they had to fight the whole world, everybody else, all the big money people. Here's a picture of him with Lord Kelvin, another famous scientist, and it was guys like this who basically came along and said that AC was the way to go, and that really helped him get ahead of Edison. But it was a long battle. One of the things that Edison did to try to convince people that AC was dangerous and that DC was the only thing to have in your home was he liked to electrocute animals. He would hire the little street urchins to go out and kidnap people's pets, dogs, cats, and what have you. And he would put on these public demonstrations where he would electrocute these animals and say, oh my gosh, this is what's going to happen to you if you let this power into your home. He went so far as to actually take a rogue elephant, which had caused some problems at a circus, and electrocuted it publicly, and that was the peak of this demonstrations that he was doing. So, rest in peace, Topsy. Along came the Columbia Exposition of 1893. Big historic event. And this is one of the things where America really got to showcase a lot of new technology, and this was really spectacular. George Westinghouse and Edison both bid on the contract to provide electrical light for the event. Edison bid $1 million and Westinghouse bid $250,000. So, you know, Edison didn't have a chance. Neon lighting that was on display. That show, I mean, you can imagine 18 whatever, and here we have neon lighting. You know, that's amazing. This is part of the exhibit. These are big giant monstrous 500 horsepower motors, and he also had big monstrous generators on display, and they actually produced the power for the entire show. So you saw all those light bulbs. People who were coming to that show had never seen anything like this before. Thousands and thousands of light bulbs. There's nothing like that before. So that was a big deal. It made a big impact on the whole world, and it really helped push AC power in front. Some of Tesla's famous friends. Okay, by this time, Tesla's getting pretty well known and pretty popular. He was a big man about town. He used to hang out at the Waldorf Astoria, and he cut quite a picture. James Dewar, famous scientist. Here we have a picture of Einstein and Steinmetz. Steinmetz is a very famous, well, I guess he was a scientist from Europe, Germany, and he eventually went on to become the chief scientist at General Electric Edison. But you'll notice here in this photo, there's Tesla, and where's Tesla here? So suddenly Tesla was not popular, and so he decided he needed to be removed from history, and that's just one example of that. One of his best friends was Mark Twain. Mark Twain used to love to hang out. Tesla had a lot of writers that hung out with him, and that's why he got a lot of PR. And mainly that was because of this man here, Robert Underwood Johnson, who was the head of New Century magazine, and that was a literary trade magazine. So basically he brought all kinds of writers into the picture, including a famous female writer named Marguerite Meriwether, who some say was Tesla's one of the only girlfriends he may have ever had in his life. Which brings up a good point. Tesla was celibate his entire life, and the reason was, he says, because he felt that if he was devoting his attention and devotion to a woman, he would be taking away from his ability to design and do what he wanted to do. So it's a very controversial thing, and I know a lot of ladies think, my God, this guy's got to be weird, but maybe in that incarnation he didn't need it. He probably came back and had his fill some other time. Perhaps. Harnessing Niagara Falls. Look at this cool picture. Look at these rocks out here. See this thing? Look at these people actually standing on the rocks here. Could you imagine I let you do that today? My God. Tesla's dream comes true. Basically, these are the big money makers. Morgan, let's see, Astor, Rothschild, and who do we have here? Vanderbilt. It's the big names of the era. These are just some of the big money guys of the era, but they're the ones that put up the money to do this. There's those little rocks I was telling you about. Where's the walkway? There's one of those people who are standing right there. Crazy. Okay. Before we get into that, he had a lot of money because he got that contract, and he opened up a new lab. He did quite a lot of things in there, and one of them was he invented X-rays. People think Roentgen invented X-rays, but this picture right here is an X-ray that Tesla accidentally took of his foot that was actually done prior to Roentgen's experiments. Okay, so no big deal. But if you can see here, he sends a picture to Roentgen, and Roentgen goes, "Wow, these are very interesting. Maybe you could tell me how you got it." Oh, and shortly after these pictures were taken, Tesla's lab burned down. No. One of many times that his lab would burn down. Okay, Niagara goes online. This is really cool. This is the top right here. See how far down? This thing goes down like 100 feet. And there's big giant tunnels that go through here, and here's the turbine. Remember, this is 1896. This is, each one of these is 500 horsepower, or 500 kilovolts. It's an incredible amount of power for the day. The buildings are still standing. Actually, these are torn down. They've gone through a lot of, well, actually, the buildings are still standing, but they've since gone through many different upgrades. Okay, world's second hydroelectric plant, Yugoslavia. All right, let's give some credit to Tesla's home country because they were way ahead of their time. So people think these Eastern European countries are backwards and all that. But you got to remember, that's where Tesla was born. So there's a lot of people like Tesla probably came from that area. Tesla invents radio and robots, and possibly even the computer. We should really give him credit for the computer and the semiconductor and the transistor and all kinds of other stuff right here. But, you know, there's so many inventions coming so fast and furious, nobody can really keep track. He wanted to show once and for all that he invented radio and not Marconi, so he arranged to have this big demonstration done in Madison Square Gardens where they built this pond in the middle of the room, and he had these little robot boats going around in the thing. And he didn't want to scare people, so he would tell people to ask the boats questions. So what's the square root of 64? And the boat would flash 4 little lights, or something like that, or 8 lights, I guess it is. Whatever. What's the square root of 64? 8. Okay, 8 lights. And so they think, and he'd be sitting there behind the scenes with a little remote control. You know, of course, people didn't know. They thought this thing was intelligent. Okay, now one thing we should mention about Marconi, and we're not going to go too deep into this because the Supreme Court has granted eventually granted the patent for the radio to Tesla, but it flip-flopped quite a few times with Marconi. There's a lot of speculation of why this happened. It could have been because of the financial backing. You know, there's some big bankers, and we know what the bankers are capable of doing. But it turned out that Marconi sued the U.S. government over its use of some patents of his during World War I, so the Supreme Court said, oh, gee, if we take the patent away from him and give it to Tesla, we won't have to use those in our case. So that was a very selfish thing, but that's what they did. All right. Now, the current war had gotten pretty bad, and needless to say, poor Mr. Westinghouse had borne the brunt of this, and he had to spend incredible amounts of money just to compete with the onslaught of negative PR coming from the likes of General Electric and all the people that were being affected by the AC Electric. So what happened was Westinghouse was on the verge of bankruptcy, and he basically called Tesla to his office and said, look, you know, we've got to do something because the bankers are demanding that the only way they're going to let me stay solvent is if I can get out of my royalty agreement to pay you all this money. And Tesla said, well, you know, George, you've always been there for me. You're a great man. I'm going to tear up my contract right now. So just imagine what $12 million 100 years ago would have bought you. Just incredible amounts of money. And that's to say that this would have gone on and on and on and on too. So he gave up. He would have made Bill Gates look like a pauper, clearly. Well, at this time, remember, his lab had just burned down. He just gave up his patent, and it's time now to move west. Oh, I should have mentioned that was the two bad guys there, Rockefeller and Morgan. Anyway, Tesla goes out to Colorado Springs. A friend of his, a lawyer, hooks him up with some property out in Colorado Springs and makes a deal with the, the power company, El Paso Power Company, to provide him power and hook him up. And in exchange, Tesla would basically service their generators and make sure that their system was top-notch and ready. One of the big reasons why he had to do this was because this part of the world is known for all sorts of interesting electromagnetic activity, lightning, and all ball lightning, and all sorts of things that he wanted to explore. Also, it was out in the middle of nowhere, and he didn't have to worry about people sneaking out there and burning down his laboratory. He had a little bit better security, and also he's going to be making massive amounts of lightning, and anybody getting near the place is going to get scared, you know, to death. So he needed a nice, secure place out in nowhere to do some really crazy stuff. You'll notice the roof on here is actually rolls back. It actually goes back like this, and that's because there's just so much less electricity and sparks going through, and you had to do that so it wouldn't catch on fire. This is a really cool picture. You see, there's actually horizontal lightning coming out of this thing. That's a daytime photograph of horizontal lightning. Amazing. This was done back in 18 whatever. Inside the lab, you know, if I had brought my speakers, we'd have this really cool sound effect. Go bang, you know, like, I forgot. Gee, tomorrow. Anyway, as you can see, the interior of the lab was pretty rustic. This is some pretty rustic. Look at that. That's a space heater. That was the only heater in the whole building. You can imagine how cold it must have got. But these guys have done some incredible, fantastic scientific research out in this Wild West atmosphere. It's amazing. Now, this is an interesting picture, and Tesla used to like to do this a lot. This is actually a multiple exposure photograph. He wasn't sitting in the room and this stuff was going around. He like, hey, look, he thought that was real cool to take these pictures with him sitting there like, oh yeah, I'm just reading, you know, nothing going on. One of his workers, big monsters, banks and oscillators and what have you. All right. Oh, one of the things that's really important here that we want to mention, and the engineers, I want you to keep up with this or follow this, but in this time he also discovered that the frequency of the surface between the Earth and the ionosphere, that space was in 8 hertz. So this is where he learned that was the frequency that worked well when you're dealing with the Earth. And this is really important now because this is going to come up with scalar waves and all this stuff, and human body and mind control, all that good stuff, because we also vibrate at 8 hertz. Okay, this is real important stuff. Real important stuff. Inside the lab, look at this picture right here. You see these little globes? Don't those look like orbs? Gee, do you think maybe all that electricity is illuminating orbs, perhaps? You know, kind of like with our digital photography and all. In other words, it's like, you know, when we have all our globes coming out, what is that? That's scalar energy. So what are we doing here? We got scalar energy. Maybe that's what's illuminating these globes. We'll discuss that. There he is sitting there playing, you know, making it look like he's actually sitting there. How many people saw the movie Prestige? Okay, you recognize this scene right here. David Bowie playing Tesla. There's Wolverine. Okay, remember the scene where they had the light bulbs all light up in the middle of nowhere with no electricity? Really happened. There's a photograph right there of the test. There's a light bulb lit up in the middle of nowhere. They lit these things up 20 miles away from the facility. This was wireless transmission of power. We're going to talk about that because there's actually 2 kinds of wireless transmission of power. Somebody has a question?
No, it might be a good time to do your experiment.
Oh, you want to have a good experiment? Okay, all right. I'll tell you what. If you would be so kind as to unplug the transformer for this guy right here.
one?
Yeah, okay, now plug in the other cord that's gonna go to that guy right there. Is there anybody here with a pacemaker? No pacemakers? Oh.
Yeah, there is something. Okay, really?
Is it, no okay. Anybody seen this happen in school? Nobody's seen this?
I
Oh,
think
yeah.
it's
Oh, that's
part
right.
of the story.
Now, if I move this over, I think we'll get a little more light. There we go. Okay, why is this, what's going on? You know what's going on. What's happening? Why is it doing that?
Why is it doing
Yeah, what's making it light up?
There certainly must be some sort of wireless energy coming out of there and stimulating the flow of photons and gas. Pumping up the gas.
All right, Derek, your turn. Okay, what it's actually doing, what Derek said, is it's ionizing the gas inside here. It's not going through the little electrodes and making it work like a black wire. It's actually entering here. It's stripping the electrons from the molecules inside here, and that's what we're seeing, right? And because those electrons are colliding with phosphorus, and that's what's making it glow. Correct? All right. You go ahead and turn it off.
Well, it's taking the neon gas inside, and the neon gas in turn goes with the phosphorus that's coated on.
Right. Now, the reason why I bought a couple different lights here is because we've got a couple different kinds of gas. Obviously, this black light. The old-fashioned bulbs tended to have nitrogen and argon and stuff like that inside of them. Nowadays, what, they're just vacuum. And the nitrogen and the argon would have reacted a little bit differently, and that would have been a little more fun, but I didn't feel like going out and buying one of those.
Almost all of the neon, nitrogen and neon.
I'm sorry,
Just that field test was also using noble gases, it weren't even
those light bulbs probably had nitrogen in them, like I said. So that's what you're probably seeing. But again, another thing that should be considered is Tesla's light bulbs are not like the light bulbs of today. They only had one wire. Okay, unlike the wires, the light bulbs we have with the plus and the minus, he only had one wire that went into them. They essentially were one wire that went in, and it would be like a ball of carbon, and the ball of carbon was what produced the light. So they're not like conventional light bulbs we have today.
I think it's important to point out to everybody though that when you illuminate that light bulb, it does make the FCC very upset.
No doubt, no doubt. You hear all the interference with the speaker going on too? No, we're going to discuss how this works.
You can probably light the neon by stick that hoop on it, stick it on top of that little pump.
Now, we could probably join hands and make the electricity across the room if we wanted to. Let's move on. Uh-oh. Got the wrong hand for this. All right, there we go. Whoa! Dang it. Sorry, guys. Regis. All right. Okay. He was only in Colorado for 9 months, but he accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. He felt like he had discovered this big discovery. He was so confident. It was pretty secret, you know. He did all kinds of wild stuff, with lightning going across town and whatnot. But he took what he learned. He got a little bit of money, and he went to New Jersey, and he constructed this facility on Long Island. Right, what they call it. I'm sorry. Long Island. There's the map right there on the coast. Right, that's where the thing is. And this is really important because we talk about the Philadelphia experiment and Montauk and all that stuff, and this all kind of comes into Long Island has a really deep history when it comes to stuff like this. Okay, this is his big transmission tower that they built for the wireless transmission of power, and we're going to get into that. Essentially, what is this? It's a monstrously big coil. It's one of these things, only huge. Inside the shop, machine shop, there he is. Not that exciting. Okay, how does this stuff work? What exactly was he was trying to do? This kind of gives you an idea. Well, darn it.
hard.
I wish somebody would do that for me. Okay, here we go, I'll just stand right
I'm not going to get too much into the Tesla coils, but if you look here, basically we have one coil that goes around another coil. So the one coil is essentially going around and it's causing the other coil to have the electrons moving. All right, I'm not gonna do. All right, but here's a really important analogy right here. The Earth, the first one involves, let's see, the Earth's natural resonant frequency pulse. So in other words, the Earth has got this pulse. It's going like this. It's breathing. Okay? Now, it's just like a car with a shock absorber. And if you have a car with a shock absorber and it's doing this, and you wait till it gets to the top push, and you push it down, what's going to happen? It's going to come up even faster. You keep doing that. Every time it comes up, you push it down, and pretty soon this thing's going to be going really fast. That's how this theory works. So basically, by calculating the Earth's pulse, and by introducing an equal pulse at the peak of the pulse, he could send a stronger pulse to it. Now what's happening is he's introducing energy, and where's that energy going to go? It's got to go somewhere. If you don't tap the Earth and start sucking the energy out, it's going to make lightning somewhere, and it's going to come out. People think lightning comes down, it also goes up. The other thing he wanted to do was send it through the air. So you see here we've got ships, planes, whatever electricity. All you got to do is have an antenna, and that's essentially what this did. This would just send the energy out into the air, into the ether, and we're going to talk about how that worked. But here you've got two really fantastic ways of generating or transmitting energy, and both of them essentially would allow anyone anywhere in the world to get that power for free. It can't work, it's not going to work. On this one here, you essentially stick a thing in the ground, you're getting power from the ground. On this one here, you put an antenna up, you're getting power from the air. One of the things that Tesla talked about, and it really got people excited, was based on this theory. He realized that if you went and, say, like had a nuclear bomb or something, and you used this concept of the pulse, and you detonated that nuclear bomb at an upward pulse, and you did that a couple of times, that resonant frequency would build up to the point where you could actually split the Earth in two. And that scared a lot of people. Okay, what he envisioned, of course, was that he would have these things all over the place. Everything would be running on robots. Warfare would be obsolete because you'd have robot warfare. Another thing he thought was he'd have balloons floating up, and these things would be beaming down power. And personally, I kind of like the idea of the balloons. I think that'd be a hell of a lot prettier than these wires we have going all over the place right now. So when you go home tonight, you guys drive around, you see all these stupid wires and transformers and light poles. Remember, that stuff should have been gone 100 years ago. We're stuck with it. It's really infuriating. All right. As soon as his investor, J.P. Morgan, found out that he really wanted to give power to the world for free, he said, "Oh my God," and he immediately pulled all his money out of it. He had 51% stake. He insisted on having a 51% stake. So remember, if you're going to get into bed with somebody, an investor, don't let them have 51%. Very important. They tore this down. The site is still there today. There's a Tesla Society that's trying to have it put back together. They were trying to build a new Tesla museum on the site in the United States, but it's probably never going to happen because the CIA is not going to let that happen. We will discuss why. Whoops, wrong button. Okay, Tesla discovers scalar waves. Scalar waves, what the heck are scalar waves? This is the coolest thing of the entire thing, because it turns out that this energy that he discovered is the same thing that we emit from our bodies. Our cells, when they resonate, are producing this energy. And it's the same thing as the energy is produced by the resonation of the Earth, the resonation of the stars, the sun, and everything else. So this is really incredible. And we're going to talk about Maxwell here briefly, and he was the one that came up with a lot of the principles involving wavelengths of light, and it will make a little bit more sense. But essentially, we live in a three-dimensional world, which the physics call three-space, but there's also space-time, or fourth dimension. Essentially what this means is that in the fourth dimension, we know that all energy or all matter can be converted into energy, and all energy can be converted into matter. We split the atom, we discovered this. But it also turns out that time itself is actually compressed energy, and it is energy which is compressed by exactly the same factor by which is considered compressed energy, the speed of light squared. So there's your unified field theory. It's not that difficult. So he got a patent in 1901 for this, but of course, obviously, patents come much later than the actual inventions. But it's important that this, when it happened, because a lot of really strange things in the world started happening shortly after he discovered scalar waves. When Tesla was a little boy, one of the first inventions he made was a wheel, a turbine wheel. All it was a wooden disc that he stuck in the river. Unlike a paddle wheel, it was just a disc, and he found that this is a very efficient design, worked really well. And so he was a very prolific designer even when he was a young boy. This is one of his later inventions, but it's interesting to note because even though he invented this thing way, way back when, it's considered today one of the most efficient advanced turbine designs still to date. So his basic design has yet to really be improved on. And you'll notice this looks like a stack of hard drives. And there's a reason for that too, because this is a very efficient. The thing is that the RPMs that you can achieve with this kind of design are incredible. And with the alloys and the metal that we have today, they can make these things go at incredible speeds. Nikola Tesla invented the electric. No, he didn't invent the electric car, but there was never a car like this. 1931, Westinghouse, Pierce Arrow got together and they got Tesla to come down. They provided him a car, and what they did was they stuck a Westinghouse motor in there, an 80 horsepower, 1800 RPM electric motor, hooked it up to the clutch. They called Tesla on the day of this big thing. He came down and he went to the local electronics shop and picked up some wires and some tubes and a couple of little gizmos, and he went back and he threw together this little box and stuck it in the glove box, hooked the motor up to it, fired the thing up. There was no battery, nothing. There's two little wires coming out of the box, and you thought, "Oh, gee, where's the electricity coming from?" Well, needless to say, Tesla had secretly set up one of these wireless transmission towers somewhere nearby, and so this car was sucking the energy right out of the air. No gas, no batteries, nothing. Now, can you imagine? This is the car that he was talking about. This car. You never buy gas. Why do we have pollution? Why are we using gas? You know, people think, oh, we got fuel cells and all this stuff. This zero pollution, zero byproduct. My God, I mean, in 1931. Now, of course, Morgan, Rockefeller, Henry Ford, either one had major amounts of money to lose if this happened. So they think, well, what happened? Why didn't we get it? Well, it's 1931. It's Tesla's getting kind of old. Tesla starts to get some recognition. Here he is on the cover of Time magazine. You know, here's a man that we can't even read about him in the school books, and he's a big secret, and yet here he is on Man of the Year. Doesn't make sense. They wanted to give him the Nobel Prize. They wanted to share with Edison. Tesla said, no way. They gave it to Marconi. All right, 1931, Thomas Alva Edison dies. Tesla's on the cover. He got greetings from FDR, the president, basically sent him a letter and told Tesla how wonderful you are and thank you for everything you've done for the country and all this. Albert Einstein, again, is one of the very famous people that wished him a happy birthday. Tesla's starting to get old. Things are starting to get kind of wild. He liked to be in the front of the media quite a bit. He was still getting media recognition every time. He'd always be saying, oh, I got this new invention, this new this, or this new that. Nobody really paid attention to him. Foreign dignitaries used to visit his little apartment all the time. This is actually his apartment. It's just a little tiny little apartment up in New York, and by this time he was pretty broke and poor, but he was still a very famous man. Interesting to note, these gentlemen here, this is prior to World War II, and these gentlemen here are Yugoslavian diplomats and VIPs, and a couple of these guys actually got executed when they returned to Europe. Very unfortunate. Before Tesla died, he became very spiritual, and one of the things he did was he liked to hang out in the park and feed pigeons. He was the pigeon guy. He was the old crazy man feeding the pigeons in the park. People thought he was nuts, but it's a very interesting story for a lot of reasons. When he got too sick and too old to go out there and feed the pigeons, he would ask his secretaries to go down to the bank, get some money, go out and buy the food, and go down the park and feed his pigeons, and make sure to look out for this white one, which was his special favorite. Towards the end there, he actually had these birds flying to his room, and he would be feeding them in his room. If you can imagine, he had all these pigeons and pigeon crap and pigeon food everywhere. It was a really awful, nasty mess, and people thought he was really getting kind of weird by this time. before he died, his favorite white pigeon came to him, and the pigeon was sick. And this is a very controversial thing, and the only place you're going to hear this story is in the original autobiography by John J. O'Neill. They kind of left this out in the later versions. But when the bird died, it kind of flew to his windowsill and died, and according to Tesla, when the bird died, there was a big emanation of white light that came from this bird. So some people like to say that this was some sort of spiritual experience, but it was almost of a Holy Spirit type thing. You can read into it whatever you want, but according to Tesla, this actually happened. Whoops, wrong button again. Where did the money go? This guy should have been a multi-billionaire, but when he died, he had nothing. And this is important because we're going to get into really, really volatile, controversial stuff really quick. And this is one of the clues about this stuff. It is alleged that his bookkeeper was none other than a guy named George H. Scherf Sr., who was an alleged Nazi. Here he is visiting with the prince. Look at him, he's getting pretty old here, but these, again, Yugoslavian dignitaries. This is the prince of Yugoslavia prior to, and this is probably one of the last pictures that was taken. We're going to talk about Tesla's connection to the CIA and the Nazis and the U.S. government and all that stuff real quick, but this is kind of an interesting little subnote. And again, this is not written in stone. I'm not saying this is true, but it's something to consider.
You see that right?
All right. Tesla dies. For all of you who think that Tesla is not dead, this is a death mask that was taken from his face. And I believe it was his good friend, I can't remember which good friend it was, that asked that it be done. It was probably some Yugoslavian diplomats. Mayor LaGuardia actually did the eulogy. So, you know, New York really celebrated him. He was a favorite son of New York, and he was still considered extremely important. Coffin draped with the American flag and the flag of Yugoslavia. Tesla's ashes, he was cremated, his ashes are inside of this urn, and this is in the Tesla Library, or the Tesla Museum in Belgrade. We're going to talk about that real quick. Tesla's possessions were confiscated by the FBI. Some people say it was the FBI, but it turns out it was actually the Department of the Navy, and that is probably because that was who he was mainly working with during the Philadelphia experiment and all that. Here's a Tesla file, his FBI file, and if you read that, basically it says, what do we do with his possessions? You know, by the way, he's doing all this secret stuff, so we don't know what we should do with it because this guy's kind of out there, and who knows what we should do. That's his safe. Remember, they were standing there greeting the guys. This is that. There he was. This is where everybody was standing. So this is what was left of his life. Everything crammed in this little tiny room.
Didn't you say he had a ray gun in his safe?
Well, who knows? You'd have to ask the FBI about that. Monuments to Tesla. This, of course, is at Niagara Falls. And look, that's a big, monstrous DC generator type of thing. But these are pretty cool. This is also one in New York. This is at the outside of the Engineers Club. This is at the hotel where he died. There's a street in New York that's actually named after Tesla. This is a very famous sculpture that was actually donated. I believe this is at Columbia University. There is a Tesla stamp, so he was honored by the United States, which is amazing considering that they tried to make him a non-person. This is the Tesla Museum in Belgrade. Of course, in Yugoslavia, this guy is a hero. In fact, in most of Europe, this guy is a hero. The children in Europe learn about this guy in school, but we're kept stupid. And I'm sure there's a good reason for that. Tesla money, he's on the money over there. Here is the ticket, and this is actually shows you the website. If you guys want to go to tesla.museum.org, there it is. The airport in Belgrade is actually named after Tesla. Now this is very important. This is a pretty unimportant looking building, right? The Tesla Museum. Certainly doesn't look like a military target, right? Well, during the war with Kosovo, the U.S. military decided that they needed to bomb the Tesla Museum. So guess what? There's no more Tesla Museum. Well, why the hell did we need to bomb the Tesla Museum? Who ordered that? God, they probably had a pretty good reason. You think maybe they're trying to hide something? They need to, maybe erase some little key facts. You know, they've been looking for an excuse to probably destroy this for a long time because this is the repository of all things Tesla.
But it is or what?
Well, I haven't been there, so I can't tell you what's inside of it and what the condition is. But you know, if you guys want to visit the website and tell me what the condition of the place is, that'd be nice to know. In 1960, the physicists, the scientific community got together and decided to finally used the name Tesla as a unit of measure for magnetic induction. This is kind of cool, magnetic induction, because the human brain produces 100 T of magnetic induction. Okay, so this is that energy that we're putting out. This is a representation of that energy. So what is this? Our aura is essentially lines of magnetic induction, kind of like what's going on here. So remember these waves that we emanate are sometimes particles and sometimes waves. Sometimes they're rays. The Earth produces 1 trillion times more magnetic energy than the human. But I kind of like to think if 3 billion humans got together and decided to focus all their magnetic energy on one thing, we could probably do whatever we want. That's a lot of magnetic induction. I mean, 3 billion times 0, what is that? Okay, so magnetic induction is defined as the number of magnetic field lines per surface unit. It is manifested in the form of radiation surrounding our body. This is our aura. The greatest magnetic induction produced on Earth was made with a nuclear explosion by the Russians, and they produced 2,800 T. So 2,800 T, what does that mean? That means 280 humans can duplicate that much energy. Think about could 300 humans make more energy than that bomb right there? Think about it. That's how powerful we are. Yeah, this is very powerful stuff. We're getting down to the end. Oh my gosh, how much time we got? How are you doing?
Maybe I watch.
8:20. This is great. Part 2. Okay, we're going to get into the juicy stuff. Cut? All right. Pause.
I just want to ask you a question.
Go ahead.
Back in Colorado Springs, I attended a convention there on the Tesla event a number of years ago, but they talked about during the time that he was there, that 9-month period or whatever, he threw some tower out there on the prairie. He set off this pulse, which was the largest pulse ever generated by humankind.
Right. He
The
actually
one pulse that lit up light bulbs for miles.
Right. He went felt in New York, actually. He went as far as New York.
Okay, but it was recorded back on Earth
200
as a
kilowatt
distortion that it maybe bounced off something in space and came back to the Earth. It was picked up again.
Well, that's exactly right, because it bounced off the ionosphere. Okay, and that's how it traveled around the Earth, was by bouncing off the ionosphere. Okay, but it should also be mentioned is that historically people thought that the generators in Colorado actually blew up during that test, and people thought it was because he was sucking too much energy. That's not true. What actually was he was putting out so much energy that you can't put energy into a generator. Generators are designed to put energy out, not in. That's what actually blew up the generators.
Yeah.
Ready to continue?
Quick question. In the Wardenclyffe Tower, I don't know if you've researched this, but he notes on the drawing there's a power source there.
Right.
And is it just a diesel powered generator that's powering it?
He had a monstrously huge Westinghouse generator in the facility, and I really wanted to have a photo of that on there. There's so much I could do. It's in there. I just didn't. I had to stop. Okay, here we go. Extremely controversial, so I'm going to use the word allegedly a lot. The electromagnetic field. Oh, I don't have to. This is all fact. Okay. 1873, James Clerk Maxwell develops a theory of electromagnetism in England and had proven magnetically or mathematically that light was electromagnetic radiation. Otherwise, light is electricity vibrating at extremely high frequency. So, the electromagnetic field, according to Maxwell's equation, propagates at a rate of c infinity, which means it propagates throughout the entire universe instantaneously. Okay? Now, when we talk about particle theory and two particles being in two different places and you touch one and the same thing happens over here, this is what this is. Okay? This is what manifestation is. This is why we can do all these things. Now, if you understand the basic relationship of how this works, the energies in the fields, you can understand how anti-gravity works. I didn't really want to get into the electromagnetic field too much because it's just so huge, but here's our visible electromagnetic spectrum right here. There's my green laser right here at 533 roughly. That's where it is. Okay, now you see this is the difference. This is 700 nanometer. That's what that means. This is the length of the peaks, between the distance of the peaks. Okay, that's a wavelength. You see the blue, it's a shorter wavelength. They all start out at the same place, but there's a shift. And you know, like in a Doppler thing, when the thing's going really fast, one edge looks a little red, one edge looks a little blue, that's what that is. Okay, that's a, you know all about that. All right, real quick. Oh my gosh, Tesla designed flying saucers. Oh, who would have thought? Why not? Okay, well, what do we got here? Let's see. Alternating fields. What is this? This is essentially, this is, what is it? It's a spinning disc. Okay, you know, I mean, so it's like a big centrifuge flying. I'm not going to get into, there's all sorts of different ways to make a flying saucer go, but this is, they say that this is where the Germans got their flying saucer technology. And there's a good possibility if you consider the Nazi connection, which is going to be coming back up here really quick, then yeah, it's very logical that somebody inside of Tesla's lab is feeding this stuff back to the Nazis. Oh, I don't know, could it have been his accountant, maybe? Sure, maybe. Philadelphia experiment. Oh boy, everybody heard about the Philadelphia experiment, right? Saw the movie? Come on, you gotta be, you're the only one? Come on, Philadelphia experiment? Come on, everybody, Roger? All right, right on. What are they trying to do? They were trying to make a ship invisible. Franklin Roosevelt was a good friend of Tesla's. Tesla met FDR when he was the Navy Secretary, and he was really impressed with Tesla. He asked him one of these days, you know, try to help out and do something for the country. Tesla said, sure. He was director of the project. He was chief scientist until 1942, until he resigned. And the reasons of why he resigned are pretty controversial, but mostly it was because of issues involving people on the boat during the test. What did they do? What did they do to the boat? What they did was they set up 3 counterflux north poles around the boat. 3 Tesla coils. They made these toroidal magnets, or toroidal coils, and they actually had dual toroidal coils. You want to say something, come on, I know you do. No? Okay. Now what happens when you put 2 opposing toroidal coils together and you fire them up? There's a field that's created inside. Now this is a graphical representation of that field, and it looks an awful lot like a yin and yang symbol, huh? Isn't that amazing how these ancient people and their religious symbols keep coming back into the scientific stuff? Wow, yin and yang. What does this actually represent? This is a 3-dimensional picture of a yin and yang. What is that? Okay, the tennis balls and baseballs, the stitching, that is a 3-dimensional toroidal field. Okay, the stitching on a baseball. So that is the shape of the field that was happening inside. They had one here, and one here. They put the boat in the middle of this. This is an Aztec thing, and this is kind of interesting because it's very similar to this, which is also a representation of this toroidal field. Maybe they're trying to tell us something. Kind of like the yin and yang was trying to tell us something. Anyway, they built this thing around the boat. They turned it on, fired it up, put the boat in the middle of a big Tesla coil, essentially. What happened was a big vortex was created. All the matters whoop into a big hole. It created a wormhole. Ship disappeared. Wow. Success. So, okay, let's turn it off. We're going to do it again, or now we're going to put 200 crew on board. Phase 2. Okay, 200 men were put on board this ship. Tesla said, I don't know about this. I think we need more time. Navy said, no, we don't have more time. We got a war coming. We got to fight this war. This was in 1942 when they finally did that thing. So Tesla actually tried to sabotage the equipment. He detuned it so it wouldn't work. It failed. He had made quite a few announcements about having contact with aliens. And this actually started in Colorado Springs when he was starting to get signals back. His receivers were picking up signals. And that was when he first thought he was having contact with aliens. But basically it got to the point to where he was actually having verbal conversations with them. And they said, you gotta not let them do this test with the people on board because there's gonna be big problems. So he agreed and he pulled out, did everything he could, but he couldn't stop it. He turned the project over to a man named Dr. John von Neumann. Von Neumann, sounds kind of German, huh? Enough said. Effects of time travel on the crew. Some people were partially embedded in the steel. Others were fading in and out. Some disappeared entirely. Many were insane. Why? Humans are normally locked into a point. At the point of conception, you're locked into a time reference. When you're trying to have a time machine, you create a zero time reference, and you have to put these two together or it just doesn't work. Time locks are very fragile. When they turned this thing on and all those people on board, they fried everybody's time lock. So essentially, their reality was all over the place. They were going in and out of all kinds of different dimensions, what have you. So that's basically what happened. Tesla realized that you needed some knowledge of metaphysics to be able to do this stuff. He also realized that by manipulating time using this technology, you could essentially reverse aging and live forever, keep yourself at one age forever. And we're going to get into this in Montauk because these guys learned that trick. And when they would go home from work, they would essentially go home and they never went home because these guys would use time tricks where they went back in time 15 seconds and it was like they never left the office. So they would leave and then they go back in time and then still be there. They work constantly and so they go home and sleep, but they weren't actually sleeping because they go back in time and do it again. So they had unending work hours.
So is that why some people say Tesla is still alive today?
Yes, probably so. Now, this is just basically a flow chart that essentially shows the potential progression of where this science could go and go in good directions or bad directions. And this is really what pretty much happened. A lot of nasty stuff happened, but after Philadelphia experiment, everything was moved to Brookhaven National Laboratories with von Neumann. Now, everybody ever heard of Brookhaven National Labs? There you go. Brookhaven National Labs is a monstrously huge particle accelerator, which essentially takes up the entire span of Long Island. So half of the geography of Long Island is dedicated to Brookhaven National Labs. And needless to say, Brookhaven National Labs is very close to Montauk Point, which we'll be talking about very soon, and so you can imagine all kinds of stuff that they could do given the technology available at Brookhaven Labs. Real quick, this is going to go on into particle fields, force fields, EMT, flat space, mind engineering, mind recognition, super weapons, all kinds of stuff. So we're not going to stay there too long. Okay, Montauk, electronics and mind control. Von Neumann and crew couldn't do their stuff at Brookhaven because that was a little too public. So they made a deal with the military. I'm not sure which agency it was, but they moved into Camp Hero. Now, Camp Hero was a forward listening base on the farthest tip of Long Island. And it had all sorts of underground structures, and they took it over and they said, here, you can have it. They actually retrofitted this big monstrous antenna for their experiments with their little beam weapons and stuff. ITT was the main contractor, and at the time, ITT was owned by Krupp. Everybody know Krupp?
No.
Krupp let's put it this way, Krupp is a major steel manufacturer, German manufacturer of steel. They made all the armor plating during World War II, and it should be noted that they sold that armor plating to the Allies as well as the Germans. They also made steel wheels for the trains, which were purchased by Americans, English, Russians, and Germans. So as far as the war was concerned, industry, banking was not affected. Everybody got everything from everybody. So there was a lot of incestuous stuff going on. So anyway, more clues about the Nazi thing. Now, one of the things that's alleged here, and you guys got to do your own research if you want to prove this or not, but all of the personnel brought into work at Montauk were essentially German ex-Nazis and what have you, brought in under Operation Paperclip. But we talked about Operation Paperclip at the UFO thing, and that's why I brought some of that here. But, and I'm going to talk about that real quick, but let's see. They found out that a person has a signature, and this is a wavelength that's unique to that individual, and if they can find that signal, they can create a computer program that allows them to track you, and they can modify that signal. They can once they track you, they can send out a second-order wavelength that would have a different frequency, which would alter your mind and introduce a new signal, which would cause interference with your signal that's in your brain. Then you can be commanded to do anything they want. Some people are naturally resistant, like all of us here, who are spiritual and have these glows and holy armor, as I like to call it. As we build up our energies and our own scalar fields, we cannot be penetrated by this stuff. So this is a very important stuff, because as we learn to enhance our glows and our energy flow and all this stuff, we're actually giving ourselves force shields that protect us. And so we have a lot of power, but it's important that we keep our vibrations high so that we are not sucked into this negativity that puts us at risk of being controlled by these devices here. So about 5% of us are protected. The rest of us, they can control. But for the 5%, they have riot squads and concentration camps. So we'll all be together eventually.
This is all part of that Phoenix project?
Yep. Operation Paperclip, when we imported Nazis to form the CIA and begin our space program. Without Bush, there would never have been a Hitler, Pope John Paul.
Oh, what a quote.
The first?
I don't know, you're going to have to do your research and look.
Because
There's been a
he
few-
was killed. He was killed.
Oh, okay, well, gee, you think maybe there's a reason for that? Maybe. We all know this guy, Werner von Braun. Oh, hey, look at him. Who's this guy? You know him? George Bush's dad? Prescott Bush. He got busted for helping the Nazis in Union Bank. That's what they're talking about. If it wasn't for Union Bank financing the Nazis, there wouldn't have been Nazis. Okay, so after the war, he got stripped and busted and humiliated. And this is where it gets really, really controversial. Are you ready? Without Bush, there would never have been a Hitler, Pope John Paul.
Oh, what a quote.
The first?
I don't know, you're going to have to do your research and look.
Because
There's been a
he
few-
was killed. He was killed.
Oh, okay, well, gee, you think maybe there's a reason for that? Maybe. We all know this guy, Werner von Braun. Oh, hey, look at him. Who's this guy? You know him? George Bush's dad? Prescott Bush. He got busted for helping the Nazis in Union Bank. That's what they're talking about. If it wasn't for Union Bank financing the Nazis, there wouldn't have been Nazis. Okay, so after the war, he got stripped and busted and humiliated. And this is where it gets really, really controversial. Are you ready? Alleged CIA Nazi ties to Tesla. Otto Skorensky. Remember, he's the guy that said that Scherf was the accountant for Tesla? There's Otto Skorensky right there as a young man. Okay? Let's look at the faces we have here. Who's that? That's Martin Bormann. Everybody know Martin Bormann? Yeah. How about him? Joseph Mengele. Yeah. Mengele.
Who's Martin Foreman?
Bormann's right here. Look at that face. Unmistakable Martin Bormann.
Give a little
Martin Bormann was the head of the Luftwaffe. If you guys are writing notes because you got to Google this stuff. Martin Bormann, write that down. He was very flamboyant. He used to have these very fancy. He used to have a swagger stick. You know, he's kind of heavy. You know, he was the head of the Luftwaffe. Of course, after the Battle of Britain, the Luftwaffe was dead, and he didn't really have much of a job. But anyway. Okay, I don't know if you guys can all read this, but this is really controversial stuff. According to this guy Skorensky, when he died, which wasn't too long ago, he had a deathbed confession. Part of his deathbed confession was releasing the identity of this man right here, this young sailor boy right here. Now look at that face right there. Okay, look at that face really hard for just a second. And I want to go back one frame. Look at that face right there. Okay, look closely at that face. Now look at that sailor right there. Kind of looks like the same guy, huh?
Who's that?
This guy's name right here is Mr. Scherf Jr., George H. Scherf Jr. George Scherf Jr. Here's his dad right here. Now remember, this is the Tesla's accountant, right here, okay? You guys read any of this stuff? Okay, let's see.
Steve, you can't see it from here. So
Okay, I'm sorry, you guys. All right, I'm just going to read. According to Otto Skorensky, pictured is the Scherf family and a few friends circa 1938. Holding Scherf's mother's hand at the left is possibly Martin Bormann. In front is Reinhard Gehlen, right here, Reinhard Gehlen. In the back is Joseph Mengele. To his right is Otto Skorensky, right here, Otto Skorensky. Let's see, where are we? Let's see, Skorensky is a young man at center right in a German Navy uniform is George H. Scherf Jr. and his father, George Scherf Sr. Let's see, to the right. He became Hitler, okay, he became Hitler's second in command. Galen, bottom front, was a Nazi general who was smuggled out of Germany under Operation Paperclip to establish the Nazi intelligence unit with Allen Dulles in the CIA, and was part of CIA mind control experiments such as MK Ultra. SS officer and physician Joseph Mengele, in the back, notoriously sadistic angel of death of Auschwitz, escaped Germany and South America after the war. Kerensky became Hitler's bodyguard and also came to the U.S. after the war under Project Paperclip. George H. Sheriff Jr. became the 41st President of the United States. George Sr. was Tesla's trusted assistant. There's Kerensky with Hitler. Now this is really cool. You guys all familiar with the children's book, Curious George? Man in the Yellow Hat? Guess who Curious George the monkey was? Friends and acquaintances of Nikola Tesla recall him complaining about Sheriff's son George Jr. always snooping around Tesla's lab. On one occasion, probably during the 30s, Tesla caught the 14-year-old sheriff looking at his notes, pouring through his books, and stealing small items. Tesla gave him the nickname Curious George, and likened him to a mischievous monkey. According to Kerensky, in his deathbed confession, Tesla hated young George. In fact, the Curious George book and the movie were inspired by Tesla's suggestion. Curiously, the day before the national theatrical release of the Hollywood production of Curious George film, the originator of Curious George, the man in the yellow hat, was found murdered under a pile of plastic garbage bags in his driveway at the age of 73. Why would somebody want to murder the man in the yellow hat? What are they trying to hide? Probably for the same reason why they wanted to bomb the Tesla museum, huh? So it gets thicker and thicker. Anyway, now if George Bush became the head of the CIA, he'd probably have a lot of power at hiding stuff like this. Huh. Russian scalar wave weapons. Now when Tesla died, it's said that the United States confiscated all his papers, and the Russian agents came over here and interviewed and recruited a lot of his lab assistants. Kind of like the way the Americans and the Russians divided up the Nazi scientists after the war. We got all the scientists, they got the data. In this case, we got the data, they got the scientists. So the Russians started working on scalar wave weapons very early. Now, we didn't talk about scalar waves, but when Tesla discovered scalar waves, he realized that a scalar wave was essentially a very powerful field, a very powerful wave that did not have an electrical charge. It was essentially like tachyons. I guess it would be like a tachyon or something of this nature. But it's kind of like the energy that we're putting out. Now, why is that? It's because it's essentially it's light. It's light at a different frequency. The energy that we're transmitting from our bodies is actually a coherent radiation, but it is light. Just like the light coming out of this laser. This is laser radiation, but it is light. So call it what you want. It's essentially the same thing. This picture here came out of Aviation News and Space Weekly magazine, which is a prestigious Air Force technology magazine. So we've been aware of this stuff for a long time, that they've been doing this. This essentially is what you could call Russian Star Wars. Now, the thing about scalar waves is what they do, there has to be two sources of these things. And when you point one beam at a target and you have another source pointing at the same target, the real activity is when these beams interconnect, and they produce an interference pattern. And it's in that signal of that interference pattern that decides what it is going to do. So in other words, this energy, this is the stuff of creation. This energy can be used to, when Tesla came up with this stuff, he told people that he could essentially shoot a beam into space and cause that energy to make a planet form out of nothing, out of the ether, out of the cosmos. And that's what we do when we manifest, right? When we manifest, we put our thoughts out there, our scalar waves. We tell the universe to give us a new Mercedes, and it materializes, or whatever, however that works. But that's the same thing, and this is acts of creation. So this is scientifically how that is working. We're going to get into that a little bit more, but you can see how we got the interference pattern. And for you physicists and scientists out here, you can tell me what that means. Michael, you know what that means?
Just multi.
Oh, sorry. Delta L cubed over C equals delta T cubed, otherwise E equals MC squared. Russian-Soviet scalar weapon use. In Afghanistan, they supposedly used it. Curiously enough, when the bodies of the victims did not decay for 30 days or longer, people thought something was really strange going on. This is kind of like when they irradiate meat and they make them, yeah, same thing, huh? Using radiation to make the meat stay, preserve meat. Well, they preserve those soldiers. Smaller versions, you know, they have things they call them Tesla howitzers. We're going to talk about Tesla howitzers. They're sort of like bazookas that send out these scalar waves. CIA uses them to execute people all the time, but that's a secret. Khrushchev had to satisfy the Soviet Presidium because they were all over his butt about the Americans doing this and that. So in order to get them off his back, he ordered the sinking of the USS Thresher. He basically pointed a scalar wave weapon at it. All the electrical systems on board fried, and it sunk and imploded. Now, this is an interesting pattern. We're going to talk about this, but this has to do with using it as a weapon. Again, there we have this intersection. You see the area of intersection makes this area, so this is the area that's going to be affected. The Tesla howitzer. We're not going to get too much into the technology, but suffice it to say that this can demonstrate that these devices can be made pretty darn small. From what I understand, they make them about this big. You can put them in a pocket, and somebody could kind of come up to you and push a button, and you'd have a heart attack. You wouldn't know what hit you. And that's how they take out people. You know, like guys that invent free energy motors and what have you. We can talk a lot about that stuff, about various people who have come up with wonderful inventions who suddenly had heart attacks. You know, this is how they do it. Notice in this drawing, this Russian drawing, they have two of them, and remember, you really need to have two pointing at the target because it's at the intersection of the beams where the destructive force takes place. Scalar wave energy domes. Tesla said that with using his powers and his secret devices that he could generate a field, and this is what it was, and this field would essentially stop anything that tried to get through it. So what is it actually doing? These things affect mass. Now, when I say dome, it's not like the entire thing is solid energy. It's actually a shell. Okay, so if you're inside here, you're not being affected. But if you try to go through that shell, you're going to disintegrate. If you have a substantial amount of mass, or steel or something, you're going to disintegrate. Japanese pilots here, this is a thing from Tokyo Evening News, June 12, 1982. These guys got so used to seeing these things out over the ocean when these were being tested and developed, that they pretty soon they just stopped reporting it. Here's somebody who was talking about they witnessed a test over Atlanta where they built the thing. As you can see, the clouds are essentially pushed away. So it creates like a pressure, and the clouds actually, you can see it by the clouds on the exterior surface. And all sorts of weird cloud formation is taking place, and that's what makes it visible. And this is important to note because we're going to be talking about clouds here really soon. Did scalar weapons cause the Siberian mystery explosion in Tunguska? Everybody heard about that?
Yes.
Okay. What was it? June 30th, 1908. Monster explosion. You probably heard it for 1,000 miles away. This was way before atomic bombs. This was out in the middle of Siberia. There wasn't anybody around. But they sure heard it. They sent this guy out here. This is a stamp from Russia, and this commemorates the expedition where he went out there and investigated the phenomenon. When he came back, he said that he suspected that it was actually a meteorite that struck the area, but there was never any traces or fragments of meteorite found. You notice that these trees are just pushed over, and this is one of the...
We also think it might have been
Oh, what now?
antimatter.
And, well, that's what it is, though. You see, this is what that is. We're going to talk about how scalar weapons actually cause explosions, because it is an interaction with antimatter.
Actually, it was my ship that exploded. I was the captain of the ship in the previous life.
You did it?
No, I was the captain of the ship. That's how I died, and that's how my previous life before this one ended.
Well, there was no traces found, so you must have disintegrated.
Yeah.
No doubt. I'm sure if they dig down, they might still find you.
There was, however, as far as alpha and particles that are found at meteorite landings, there was that read there that you only get from a meteorite explosion.
Right, but that's true. But it's also possible that what was going on here, duplicated those very same phenomena. And one thing that should be also interesting is noted If you do a search on Tuscaloosa, and that is spelled Tunguska, Tunguska, if anybody wants to look that up. They sell a liquid vitamin product that is made from the herbs that are growing, because they say that the crater, the vegetation that's now growing in that crater just has all these incredible properties, these healing properties. And so that's kind of bizarre. So out of this destruction came all this some really weird stuff.
I'd heard that they thought it was a comet coming in at such a low angle that it spread and exploded with
Well,
all
they've
sorts of
been speculating quite a long time, but if you look at this map here, here's Tesla's facility in Long Island. Here's a direct line over there. Okay, so Tesla had to find a good place to test his weapon. Well, how about the middle of Siberia, where there's nobody around for hundreds and hundreds of miles? Not going to hurt anybody. They heard it, but he didn't hurt anybody. He might have knocked down some trees and killed some animals, but for the most part, this is how he was able to test this stuff. That was 1909. Okay, chemtrails and scalar waves.
yes.
Oh, lots of chemtrails nowadays, huh?
Have you noticed that?
Isn't that kind of weird, all the chemtrails? Kind of strange, huh?
What's going on?
But it's weird how when there's chemtrails and then soon after everybody gets sick.
Yeah, people get sick. Well, a lot of people are thinking that there's stuff in the chemtrails, and there's probably a lot to that. But, you know, some people say they're putting AIDS in there, tuberculosis, all kinds of weird things. But let's talk about, this is pretty intensive stuff. Okay, these special clouds, when irradiated or salmon teal colored, are vibrated into cirrus-like clouds so that when viewed from above, all activities of scalar weather modification can be made visible. Think of it like a crayon being drawn across the top of a chessboard. When the individual blocks across the chessboard are capable of moving in 4 dimensions. These thick contrails are laced with aluminum oxide and barium salts. Remember barium salts, because that's going to come up. They are there to reveal the movements of this chess game. So this is very important because they're using this for reconnaissance, and it makes it able to see otherwise invisible radiation. There's a satellite view, so this is what it looks like from up above. See this big swath right here? Something caused those. Now I don't think this was wind, because if it was wind, it'd be a little more localized. Now, this is a pattern. This is why they do it. The scalar waves cause these particles because it's essentially matter. Scalar waves are looking for matter with a little bit of mass. So that's why they put the aluminum and the barium in there. Barium does something else, but the aluminum is mainly to give the cloud some mass so it can react. They're used to tune scalar weather modification. Now remember, these are waves. So here we have 2 wavefronts. See the waves? So this is an interaction between 2 wavefronts. A lot of times they like to have these things go through here because they can show an interruption. This is very illustrative. Okay, they find the intersection of these moving things. This is how they tune it, because you're trying to, okay, where are we? You know, you can't, it's like using infrared lasers, and people ask me, okay, how do we aim our infrared laser? Well, you gotta have night vision. Well, what if you don't have scalar wave vision? They haven't come up with that yet, so we use chemtrails. All right, aluminum, oh, interferometers. We could talk about interferometers. Anybody here know what an interferometer is? Just one? Come on, you know what interferometers, right?
Sorry.
Laser interferometry, has anybody heard about this?
It's been a long time, a little time.
Gareth, come on, you guys. Jeez. Okay. Katrina. Just one? Come on, you know what interferometers, right?
Sorry.
Laser interferometry, has anybody heard about this?
It's been a long time, a little time.
Gareth, come on, you guys. Jeez. Okay. Katrina.
Wait a minute, are you just gonna throw that out there? Not
Okay,
say what
okay,
it is?
never mind. All right. Laser interferometers. Okay, a laser is a yardstick because it is a section of the remember the electromagnetic spectrum, all the colors? If you take a knife and you slice through it, at that slice point, you have a designated wavelength, a very, very thin section. Okay, so let's say this right here is producing 523 nanometers. This is a very, very thin line out of the middle of a huge, huge wavelength. The red, of course, this is 635.
Is it different than a diffraction grating?
2 different things completely. Okay, now, an interferometer basically takes a laser beam, puts it into a beam splitter, which breaks the beam into 2 equal parts. Okay, usually they're polarized, one's A, one's minus, whatever, but they now go in 2 different directions. They're still the same wavelength. One interacts with something else. Now, if you want to measure, you basically, because we know that a wavelength is so long, it gives us a very, very specific unit of measure. So if you have a mirror and you shine one laser here, and then you shine another laser here, and then you move this mirror back, now we can send those beams and we can put them back into another beam splitter and combine them, and they'll create an interference pattern, just like the scalar waves do when they combine. Now, with that interference pattern, we can detect how far this thing is away from this thing. So in other words, once we do a minute atomic movement or whatever, it's going to tell us what that movement is. So depending on the length of the wavelength and the size of the wavelength, that is going to give you a very precise measurement. So when we make semiconductors and computer hardware and what have you, the size of those chips is controlled by the wavelength that's exposing the master pattern, which is what is the semiconductor. It's a photolithographic process. When the Americans came up with computer chips, we were using a wavelength that was yay big. The Japanese came along and said, oh, hey, what if we use a wavelength this big? We can make chips that are way smaller. Well, they did that, and that's when the Americans lost their lead in the computer industry.
We also use interferometry in astronomy to determine this astronomical distance of the
Right.
objects.
It's the same thing. It's a measurement. Now, what they're doing here with scalar interferometry is that they can, if these have a certain wavelength, and this one has a certain wavelength, when those two wavelengths interconnect, one's going to interfere with the other, and it's going to change it. So it's going to create a completely different waveform. Now, what if that waveform is destructive? Okay, well now, wherever those things meet together, that's where that destructive energy is going to take place. And let's say the same thing applies to mind control, weather control, what have you. Now let's talk about Katrina. Here we have a monstrous hurricane coming on the coast. Here's Florida, and here you can see Louisiana, and what have you. Now, notice the shape of this pattern, this area right here. Okay? That is a kind of a keystone shape, right? Notice the shape of this pattern right here. That is exactly the same pattern. Now, what's happening here? It looks almost like there's a pressure pushing down on the clouds. Now, remember how when they created the field, how it pushes the clouds all the way? What are they doing? Kind of looks like they're pressing the thing down. It's almost like they got a sponge and they're squeezing the water right out of it. Kind of, you know? So you think they're trying to make the hurricane worse here? You think they're trying to make the flooding worse, or you think they're trying to help? Is this the Americans doing this, or is this the Soviets? Who's doing this? But clearly, if you're familiar with scalar waves, it's pretty clear to see what's going on here. Chemtrails make scalar weapons test strikes visible. Okay. Chemtrails flow through these ionic skies, give watchers a very good idea of the intensity of which a strike was delivered. These strikes produce weeping cirrus streaks like the one seen above. The holes vary greatly in size from a half a kilometer to 100 kilometer or greater. Notice the converging waveforms. See the waves? We have two converging wave fronts. Now remember how I said it pushes away? Okay, so that means the source of this wave is over here. The source of this wave is over here. So we have converging waves, okay? At this convergence, we have an interference. Look at that big old hole. See that? Look at that contrail going right through it. Stops, starts back up again. That's pretty darn good aiming going on right there. Now, this is pretty important because what the heck is going on here? Why are they trying to learn how to blow big old huge holes in space that you can't even see? They say it's exhaust. We're supposed to believe that. Does that look like exhaust? These are motors, and this is where it's coming from. What's that? What does that do? You notice the Air Force markings? You know, I noticed that a lot of these chemtrails are coming out of areas like Vandenberg and what have you. You ever notice Point de Vue, Vandenberg? A lot of these high, and these are really high altitude. Not like normal aviation. Real high altitude stuff. This is not normal. I mean, come on. What does that? Okay, now, why? Come on. I mean, come on. You know? Look at this shape. How do you make a square cloud? Okay? Or how about this? little bump here. If you see this, this is actually a corkscrew. How do you make a thing do a corkscrew? It's crazy. Anyway, bottom line, these things are so common that you must conclude that everybody in the countries where this is happening knows what's going on. They're letting it happen. American misuse of scalar weapons. What? The Russians the only ones that have this stuff? Come on. All right. HARP. Everybody familiar with HARP? Yeah. What is HARP for? Okay. I don't know what that means. High altitude.
Atmospheric research.
There you go. Thank you, JC. Have anyone ever heard of a woodpecker?
Research project.
Went right past me. Anybody heard of the woodpecker? Woodpecker? You would. Well, okay, the woodpecker came from Russia. Of course you would know about that. A good friend of mine, a guy named Dr. Bob Beck, not a really good friend, but he's, if anybody read the stuff from Mike Emery, you would have heard his thing. But anyway, he was sent to the Soviet Union to figure out what this woodpecker was, and what it was people in Portland, Oregon were complaining about these funny noises in their heads. Like tick, 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 tick. And the whole town, everybody was getting it. Nobody knew what it was. And what it was extra long frequency waves converging on this one point of the globe. Somebody was sending these things through the earth, and they were coming up and they were bothering these people in Oregon. Now, the official explanation that this is something to do with communicating with submarines. And we do the same thing. We use extra long frequency for communicating with submarines. But in reality, what the woodpecker was very similar to what we do with the contrails. They were setting up an electronic grid that they could use for aiming and calibrating their scalar weapon systems. Now, here's a picture from 9/11. This is the top of the trade tower. Remember the big towers on top of the trade tower? Okay? Well, somebody just happened to take this video. Now, the tower is going down. See a tower turning into dust here? Turning into dust. We should be reminded, yes, steel turning into dust. Okay? This is a steel tower. Look at what's happening here. Before this thing can fall over, it has turned into dust. See? It is now dust. How do you do that? Is that from fire? Did jet fuel make that thing? I don't think so. Something else going on here. These are cars in the general vicinity of 9/11. Now there's a ton of pictures like this. I could have had a whole half an hour and a half just on 9/11. So we're going to move really quick. But look what we have here. Look at this car. It's melted. But look, rubber tire intact. Okay? Look at this car. Melted. The steel is melted, and yet rubber tire intact. Look at this. Looks like something took a big bolt of lightning going across this thing, melted the car, fried it, broke the glass. Rubber's still intact. It was not flame. It was not explosion. It was not high heat. It was something else. It was something radioactive.
Kind of like that hijacker's ID car that magically
Yeah.
after the whole building.
Look at this car. It's melted. But look, rubber tire intact. Okay? Look at this car. Melted. The steel is melted, and yet rubber tire intact. Look at this. Looks like something took a big bolt of lightning going across this thing, melted the car, fried it, broke the glass. Rubber's still intact. It was not flame. It was not explosion. It was not high heat. It was something else. It was something radioactive.
Kind of like that hijacker's ID car that magically
Yeah.
after the whole building.
Yes.
The paper passport laid on the ground, yeah.
Another thing about 9/11, remember, steel pillars evaporated, and yet paper didn't. Paper didn't burn. There were paper everywhere. Why is that? Because steel is a much higher density, specific gravity of mass than paper. Paper weighs nothing. So in other words, the energy didn't affect the paper. But a human body has high density. Steel, concrete, desks, computers, very high density. Paper didn't burn. Doesn't make sense. Lots of possible victims. Flight 800, 990, JFK Jr., the Space Shuttle, World Trade Center, Aero, Flight, whatever, Gander. I mean, they've been doing this for a long time. Okay, but because we were kept stupid about Tesla and scalar energy, we go, oh, it must have been a lightning bolt. Oh, it must have been a missile, a terrorist bomb. Well, it was probably all three, but it was also scalar weapons. Who do scalar weapons really protect? What did they really build these things for? Do you think they built them to attack the Russians? Well, they have Russia. I mean, what are we going to attack each other with? I don't think so. So, remember, when you blast a hole with a scalar weapon, what is it doing? It's essentially blasting a hole in the fourth dimension. Now, for those of us that were here for the UFO thing, we know that most of these entities operate in a higher density level than we are at. So how do you do battle against an enemy that isn't even in the third density? It's in a whole other density. We can't even see them. They're doing battle with enemies they can't even see. That's why they're using these weapons.
But they won't, but the really sad part about it is most of the strikes are against the good guys.
Well, good guys is a relative term.
Well, let's put it this way. The people in government who control humans, they are striking those ETs who want to help humans.
You got it. You got it. That's exactly the point I'm going to make. Anybody familiar with Billy Meyer?
Yes.
Billy Meyer fans here? Okay, great.
No.
No?
Who is he, fans?
Okay. Billy Meyer is a Swiss bus driver, one-armed Swiss bus driver, and he is famous because he made contact with this entity who is an alien named Semyasi, and she flies this craft, and she is from the Pleiades. These are humanoid aliens, and they made contact with this guy, and they said, you know, we like you, we're going to talk to you because the government doesn't want to have anything to do with us, but we think that the common man might not be threatened by you, and we think that you might do a real good job of helping everybody learn about us and send the message that we have to the rest of the world. He wrote a book called Message from the Pleiades. Pleiades. Has anybody read that book? Come on, you got to get it. Now write that down because you know how to go get that book now. Message from the Pleiades by Billy Meyer. In that book, and remember this book was put out a little while ago, distributed by this guy, Wendell Stevens, actually was dealing with this guy. Anyway, in that book, Semyasi warns Billy Meyer that the United States is developing a new type of weapon system that she called barium weapons. And I thought, okay, that's kind of interesting. And according to her, these barium weapons would rip huge holes in the ozone. And I thought what that meant was the idea is that they would go to a foreign or enemy country, they'd rip a huge hole in the ozone, and all sorts of nasty radiation would come down and fry the people in the target country that they did this to. Which is kind of silly because ozone holes kind of move around, so what's to say it's not going to be over here one day and then move over you the next day? Doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, you remember those holes that we saw in the, what do you think? You think maybe they're blasting big holes in the ozone when they do those scalar weapon tests? So that's probably what she was talking about. And I'm thinking maybe if the Earth is controlled by the Illuminati and the United States government made a treaty with the Greys, and the Greys are working for the reptoids, and the reptoids are service to self entities that have essentially been controlling the world since Atlantis. And
all this is 2024 BC.
Right, and we know, or we are being told that the Pleiadians represent the Galactic Federation, and they've been at war with these guys for a long time, and they're allegedly coming to our planet to rescue us and disrupt the reptoids' control of the Earth and usher in a new form of civilization and an enlightened time ahead. So it makes sense that the powers that be in the world would harness this technology and would do everything they can to try to do battle with these guys. So if you're going to try to do battle with these guys, that's probably how they're doing it. No. Interesting. Huh? That's right off your page, huh?
What's SDS?
Service to self. If you go back when we did the thing on the UFOs, one of the biggest issues, or one of the biggest important ideas to come out of that was that the universe could be divided into two groups: the service to self and the service to others. Here on this level of our existence on Earth, we coincide with service to self and service to others. We're all a little bit of both, and you need to have both because you can't serve others without having somebody to be served. So, but as I like to tell people though, if we could just try to be 51% service to others and 49% service to self, that's all we really got to do, and that gives us a ticket out of here. And when these guys come to rescue us. These guys want us to stay in a service to self mode. They want to keep us down, and this has a lot to do with where the Earth is going in our big transition that we're getting ready to make. That's such a big critical aspect. All right, we're almost done. Directed energy weapons. They use lasers to basically guide the lightning. And we all know about Ben Franklin's experiment. Now, I used to think that this is how they shot down the planes, that they would point a particle beam or a weapon, and then they would shoot off a blast, and the lightning would take it out. So that is a basic particle beam weapon. So you can use a scalar wave weapon, or you can use a directed energy particle beam weapon. They basically do the same thing. More beam weapons, so-called non-lethal beam weapons. Laser dazzler, what is that? That's one of these that's about 50 times brighter. Now, anybody want me to point this in their face? Okay, now imagine if this was 50 times brighter and it was pointed in your face. That's what they're doing in Iraq right now. Okay, that's against the Geneva Convention, but we do it. They just got through developing this. This is a basically big microwave, points microwaves at you. Yeah, just imagine what that feels like. Here's another thing, produces short bursts of acoustic, really 150 decibel, highly focused noise. So what are they going to do? Blind you, burn you, make you deaf. Secretary of the Air Force says non-lethal weapons such as high-power microwave devices should be used on American citizens in crowd-control situations before they are used in the battlefield. This is our American government. They want to do this to us. So whenever you see these newfangled weapon systems coming out, remember, they want to use it on us. Now we're almost done, and that's the end of it. We made it. This is how much film we got? I'm gonna say goodnight, and then we're gonna turn off the camera, and then we're gonna do the question and answer. Okay? Hope everybody enjoyed Tesla.
Very good.